Hey, Doooovid here. I'm live. I'm back on another author Tuesday afternoon. Henry Doktorski, who was with us a few months ago to talk about two of his books. Have them here. I recommend checking out that video if it's interesting, or there's many interviews. You could look on social media from Henry on his first book, which was Killing for Krishna. An important matter, I guess, for people in ISKCON or familiar with the Hare Krishna Society and understand here from Michigan, understanding, God forbid, a tragic thing that happened historically, extremely good research on that. And then 11 Naked Emperors, which is explaining, in reality, is a very complicated theological concept to understand historically what happened, where you had some sort of succession system that lasted a period of time and then is no longer, and there's a new system that was in place and the history and the people involved. So extremely interesting. To Henry's new books, his 10-volume series, which he's coming out with in a certain order, and I'll let him explain why. The first volume that came out was I think volume 3, which I read through last week. Excellent. This is Prabhupada's Palace of Gold, and it's basically dividing it up into like 10-year periods or multi-year periods. And I'll let Henry explain how he structured his book. But he had been planning this book for over a decade, and in the first time we talked, he explained how really karmatically, just he had been a devotee and a follower of the Hare Krishna movement and had believed in Kirtanandana Swami and didn't know about or understand possibly the negative side of what was going on till a later period in his participation. And he was the musical director, did many important things. I was seeing the book, like the actual building, laying the gold leaf, very impressive construction things that Henry was involved in. So just this long history of a whole cast of characters that really, some of these guys have bookshelves. A lot of these Westerners who became Hare Krishna devotees and went around the world preaching it and opened up temples and various things. And so 10 full volumes of the history of Swami Bhaktipada in the West Virginia Hare Krishna. So a pleasure to have you back, Henry.
Pleasure is mine, David. Thank you so much.
I guess in the first time you appeared on my channel a few months ago, I'm going to link that video in the description. Henry gave his bio and how he came about heard about the Hare Krishna movement, eventually became a part of it, and what he did in New Vrindaban, and then to some point where he just has access to the historical documents of the whole New Vrindaban. And my mother's a lawyer. I didn't go to law school, but I've worked for a bunch of lawyers multiple times in my life where they had boxes and boxes and boxes of documents, and you have to go through them for some thing that's pertinent to a case. But something like that where Henry just got the archives and hadn't planned on being the historian and decided to write this history, and it's coming out. It's massive. It's thousands of pages. There's all types of interesting things, from, God forbid, the lowest of times to the best of times. So do you just want to talk about the book in totality, how you structured it, why you structured it in the various ways, so people could understand, there's just this massive project covering decades and hundreds of characters?
Well, Doooovid, yeah, I suppose I could briefly summarize. I had just gotten my undergraduate degree in music, and the last couple of years in college, there were some negative things that might have happened to me. For instance, with women, for instance, I had a really intense relationship with this gorgeous, wonderful lady, and then that ended very suddenly against my will. And a couple other things. You know, I was at that time in my life, I was feeling rather insecure. I mean, I had gotten my undergraduate degree. I was preparing to go to graduate school to study piano, and I had gotten accepted at North Texas State, but I didn't know how I was going to pay for it. My undergraduate years, I got a full scholarship, but at North Texas, I did not. So my life was kind of. I knew it was at a junction. Of course, when you graduate, that's a junction. You know, you're ending one thing and moving to another. But I was unsure of the future, and I met the Hare Krishnas in West Virginia, almost accidentally. And I had been looking for an Eastern religion or philosophy. Was doing transcendental meditation. I had seen Baba Ramdas in a lecture at the University of Kansas, and I bought his book, Be Here Now, and I learned about reincarnation and vegetarianism and karma, and I thought, oh, this is really cool. I want to investigate this. And so then, you know, I met the devotees, and I really liked what I saw. And then I met Kirtanandana Swami, and he was the guru at the New Vrindaban community. This is the Palace of Gold, the pictures that I helped build back in 1978, 79, 80 even. And I decided to try it out, you know, become a Hare Krishna devotee. I put my graduate school on hold. And I thought I can always go back to school the next semester, you know, if I didn't like with the Hare Krishnas. But after a few months, I really had a conversion experience. And for 15 years, I served Swami Bhaktipada as a resident of the New Vrindaban, West Virginia Hare Krishna community. And finally, many years later, began to see and hear things which did not jive with what the propaganda was. In other words, I was beginning to have some doubts about the sanctity of my spiritual master. And eventually, you know, I found evidence, testimony that proved to me that the guy was a pretender. He wasn't really a bona fide spiritual master, as explained in the Bhagavad Gita. Krishna says, you know, you must approach surrender to a bona fide spiritual master, inquire from him submissively, render service to him, because the self-realized soul can impart knowledge to you, because he has seen the truth. So after 14 years or so, you know, I really began to see evidence that indicated that my spiritual master was not what he pretended to be. And so I finally left. But I was still friends. I still had many friends at the New Vrindaban community. So I'd go visit several times a year. I lived in Pittsburgh for 22 years after I left the West Virginia community. And I would visit. I would visit many times a year and see my friends. And during one trip, I had started to write a history of the community. I had a large archive of my personal magazines and newsletters and you name it from the community. And I started to write just a little history. And one of my friends, his name was Tapapunj, he said, I have something that you have got to see. And he took me for a walk up the hill past the side of the palace in this abandoned gravel parking lot. And there was this run-down trailer from a trailer truck with leaky roof, all right? And he took me up inside, and inside was thousands and thousands of pages of New Vrindaban publications, documents, Swami Bhaktipada's private correspondence. All this had been kept in a secret room locked with iron bars in Bhaktipada's basement. But at the time he was in prison, the house was abandoned, and some people had gotten in there and found this stuff. And Tapapunj acquired it, and he gave it all to me. It was like discovering Captain Kidd's treasure. Anyone who wanted to write something about the community this was like a treasure chest of information. And it took me 10 years to read through it all. I mean, there were thousands and probably tens of thousands of pages. And during my research, I discovered classified documents, which may have been only known to Bhaktipada and his secretary, describing in great detail the plot to murder a New Vrindaban dissident devotee. His name was Steve Bryant, known as Salochan Das. And this incriminated a lot of top guys at the community, including one very beloved Swami. Who
I mentioned, lives about, I mean, God forbid, comes from about 10 miles from me here in Metro Detroit. Unbeknownst to me, from studying Bhakti Yoga and Hare Krishna for years. But when I read the story that man is actually, Royal Oak, Michigan, for people familiar with that.
Yes, yeah, right. Stephen Bryant grew up in Royal Oak, Michigan. Anyway, so I said this book has to be published first, and that was Killing for Krishna, which came out almost 3 years ago now. And then it's just like the way I feel it. Krishna has given me this priceless archive. I mean, he could have given it to someone who was loyal, perhaps, to to ISKCON, or loyal to this Swami, and they probably would have burned it all because it's very incriminating documents in there. But anyway, it's been an exciting journey for me. I see it as my sacred duty to publish these. It's going to be 12 volumes in all. The 2 first books, and then the 10-volume series, which is a biography of Swami Bhaktipada and the history of the New Vrindaban community. And it's been an adventure. I've met so many wonderful, wonderful, wonderful people who are former Hare Krishnas and even current Hare Krishna members who have read some of these books and sent me very, very nice emails, which you have seen some of them. Anyway, so that's how this project all started. 2 volumes are finished. The Palace of Gold and the Murder and the Mandir, and then in a few weeks, hopefully volume 1 will come out. You did ask why I'm not releasing them in order or publishing them in order. Volume 3 came first, and then 5, and then 1, and that's because Volume 3 I thought was very important to come out first because it deals with the shooting incident of June 1973, where a father came looking for his daughter. A Kentucky redneck father came looking for his runaway daughter at the community, and he brought a friend or a few friends. We're not sure exactly how many were there. And they commandeered the temple with shotguns, and the devotees were forced. They just wanted to scare the New Vrindaban devotees into revealing the location of his daughter, who he believed was hidden at the community. So I thought that was important to come out first. Volume 5 is important because it deals with the murder of Charles St. Denis in 1983. I thought that was important to show the story about that, the accurate story, and then now I'm back on the next volume will be number 1.
Yes, I'm sharing here the larger table of contents from the whole 10-volume series, and the enormity of the project, because you're covering a large institute, like 4,000 acres of land, hundreds of people that live there over decades, and to some extent the vision and work of one man, Kirtanandana Swami, that took a few acres of farmland and turned it into to some extent a legitimate call it Hindu, don't like the terminology, pilgrimage site that tens, hundreds of thousands of people have made pilgrimage to, one of the nicest temples to Krishna in North America. And if anyone knows a local Hare Krishna temple that is basically in every major city, New Vrindavan is probably known to all of them, of the hundreds, thousands, I don't know exactly number of ISKCON centers around the world, but you would assume that probably all of them have heard of New Vrindavan. And I mean, we could talk about my own personal, but I'll just cover your book maybe afterwards, my own personal psychoanalysis of Kirtanandana Swami. But this person who kind of has a vision of what he wants to do, and he's part of an international movement, and has a lot of personal flaws, but is able to carry it out, recruit deeply flawed people. You mentioned, possibly, God forbid, psychopathic murderers. That God forbid, some of these people who became Hare Krishna devotees were literally psychopathic murderers that killed multiple people. And however, as a religious movement, you take what you could get, and from just looking, a religious movement that was trying to convert people to an Eastern religion. They had all types of people that joined, people like Henry, some very wealthy, prominent people, some very dangerous people, but the greater ability to build this huge, complex new culture. And it was really the fulfillment of probably Prabhupada's vision was to have this new way of life where it wasn't just people that were going to temples doing parts of yoga chanting, but a complete transformation of the lifestyle, and almost like, to phrase it in the terms like a war on the West, that this new way would become more popular, and there would be large amounts of Westerners that would change the lifestyle to this Vedic lifestyle. And it's a tough task to say. It's very difficult to make converts to anything. But New Vrindavan was probably the biggest success. But having all these deeply flawed characters together, with amazing teachings and various things, has some pretty crazy stories. You could compare it to one of these, like, Henry's a musician, more classical, but like a VH1 story of like the rise and fall of Kirtanandana Swami, where, I mean, he always had, we'll talk about the psychoanalysis later, but people who worked extremely hard, did unbelievable austerities that it would almost be unimaginable to people, sleeping in the dirt, cold. I mean, people dying, getting sick. You have things about, quarantine and hepatitis. And to, at a certain point, after probably a full 10 years of effort, having this most successful Hindu pilgrimage site in North America. At some point, they did it. They completed the temple, and it became this world-renowned, recognized, established, New Vrindavan. That's where the Temple of Gold, the nicest Krishna temple in all of North America, is. And then kind of like the excesses and money and various things and things that are somewhat unknown. Was there drug dealing? Was a lot of this paid for through illegal activities? And also the culture of the movement, where you had an extreme established disciplined place where, in theory, the principles of Krishna's consciousness, the deities were installed, and the priests were properly serving the deities, and you had women and children that needed to be protected. But then you had these deeply flawed people that were trying to convert and join this new movement, and couldn't really do it all that well. And they weren't, so to say, capable of fully living within the parameters of what it meant to be part of this new culture. So they were Fringies, and they lived outside of the community. And Kirtananda, I would kind of put it like, I mean, you give his biography and you talk more, but I mean, comes from a Protestant preacher background, maybe somewhat as like an evangelical preacher, unbeknownst to the devotees, is running the larger establishment of the people who are seriously trying to follow the principles to every nook and cranny, and the deities and all the possible necessities of building and maintaining this temple being met, trying to make money off of it, possibly in the mold of an actual Indian Vedic pilgrimage site, and controlling a larger culture that includes these fringe characteristics. And if I have the book here, 100 Monkeys. God forbid, the central character, one of them, Mr. Dreshler, Tirtha, was a psychopathic, cold-blooded murderer before he even met the Hare Krishnas. According to his own book, he had murdered multiple people before he even joined the Hare Krishna movement, God forbid. And but this guy ends up in the community, and relatively, Kirtananda turns him into a useful person. He's like he works with the tools that he has, and God forbid the tools that he has includes like psychopathic murderers. But you try to lay it out in your book. The history includes the good and the bad, but the main, like the accomplishment of actually doing it. That this man, despite of all these crazy things that you write in the book, actually accomplished. Buying a few acres of farmland and turning it into the biggest Hindu pilgrimage site in North America.
Right. New Vrindaban was and is an extremely beautiful project. The vision, all right, which Swami Prabhupada, the founder of the Hare Krishna movement, he wanted one of the 7 points in the prospectus for the International Society of Krishna Consciousness was establishing a place of pilgrimage, which could be a gathering place for thousands of devotees and Hindu pilgrims, and it was really a gorgeous project. I tell you, when Prabhupada's palace was completed in 1979. That's when, all the media, wonderful publicity. Previous to that, the Hare Krishnas, for the most part, were getting negative publicity because of airport scams, collecting money, deprogramming cases, or minors joining the movement and then being hidden from their parents in big court cases. But after Prabhupada's palace was completed, one of the major world newspapers pointed out that this is a new phase of preaching for the Hare Krishnas. Instead of meeting someone on the street or in the airport trying to force them to buy a book, here they're coming on their own accord to see a really beautiful shrine. And even Bhaktipada himself said, if you build a better mousetrap, the whole world will come to your door. So, from living there myself, being just absorbed in this spirit of helping to create a place of pilgrimage, not only for Hindus, okay, but for all people to come and taste a bit about what Krishna consciousness is about. It's a beautiful, beautiful vision. And because most of us at the community shared that vision and the joy we experienced from helping to build it, all right, for quite a few years after the palace was completed, I was basically sent on the road fundraising for the community. And we did lots of austerities. You briefly mentioned austerities, but in order to save money, we never rented a hotel. All right, we just stayed. Me and 1 or 2 other buddies that were out together. We would just sleep in the van, and it was a cargo van. We had built a deck where we'd store paraphernalia underneath and cooking gear and sleeping bags, and one of us would sleep on top of the deck, one would sleep on the floor, someone might sleep across the 2 front seats in the van. And then in the mornings, see the Krishnas, right from, see, the whole, every part of your life is to remember Krishna, because
if maybe I frame this in a way to make it, the enormity of the task of what you're trying to do in writing the history of it, because you have your own personal part where you played a role in the working, not only being part of New Vrindavan and a disciple of Kirtananda Swami, but of actually working on the construction of this temple, to the whole history of. There's so many multiple factors. So there's this man Kirtananda that purchases the property and oversees the project, but there's the larger ISKCON society that is behind the project. So you have all sorts of people from around the world coming to join this vision, this project of, Kirtananda doesn't necessarily have to tell these people who Prabhupada is. That the people who are coming to New Vrindavan are usually already part or familiar with the Krishna movement, and your level where you come in 10 years later into the project, but probably the tens or hundreds of people that slept in cold barns, did austerities, and kind of this madman who bought a piece of farmland and is like, I'm going to build the biggest Hindu temple in North America that no one could ever imagine, to glorify his spiritual master. And there's all these people that are sleeping on the ground, in the cold, risk to their health, untrained, working at this, for years before you even have heard of the ISKCON movement. When you come in, it looks like there's been it was after Prabhupada's death, and the project had largely not accomplished much in the first 8 years of these people sleeping in a farm, trying to build the biggest temple, hadn't accomplished much. But when you come in, that period of time, there's tens, hundreds of people working on this temple. I mean, and you do this for years, where you're a laborer in building this temple for a few year period before it's actually built.
Well, yes. I mean, the community was started in March of 1968 by Kirtanandana Swami and his buddy Hare Krishna, and it had a slow start. Oh my God, an extremely slow start. Months after they had started, even Swami Prabhupada said, "You should just leave. Forget it. Give up on it. And but they stayed, and as time passed, the concept changed. See, originally it was meant to be an agricultural, self-sufficient community, all right, where people would have cows, they would plant crops, and they would live peacefully chanting Hare Krishna, worshiping the deity at the temple, raising their children. And then around 74, 75, when the work on building Swami Prabhupada a palace began to pick up, they realized, the administration realized that they were going to need lots and lots of money to build this. And so many of the residents went out fundraising. And the idea for the biggest temple, the largest temple in North America, that didn't really happen till about 1982 or 83. Previous to that, it was just to build a beautiful palace for the spiritual master. And as you mentioned, he passed away in 77. So 2 years later, it was dedicated as a memorial shrine.
If just to put in perspective, you're saying, I was interested in your work because, that's somewhat my involvement in the Hare Krishna was I wanted to be involved in construction of places of worship. And I love the Hindu temple concept. And I don't mean to be insulting, use the word
it's okay.
But, and I've been part of the opening of multiple Hare Krishna temple centers here in Michigan at different levels. And now you're saying you make money by going into wealthy yuppie areas where you have people from India that are doctors and engineers and make donations. And ISKCON was worldwide, where in London you might be able to raise money by recruiting the Beatles. Mother Malati comes here to Detroit. I have her at multiple events, even on my YouTube channel, who got George Harrison to make a huge donation. And maybe in Manhattan you could recruit the kids of wealthy people and Henry Alfred Ford here in Michigan. But in West Virginia, it's hard to make money as a Hare Krishna devotee. And maybe the devotees went out and did certain things, but God forbid, at the end of the day, you say it was drug dealing. For a certain period of time, times were so bad that the only way that they could fund operations was dealing drugs. I mean, God forbid.
Well, I wouldn't say that the only way that they could find funding was
That was the they didn't have an Alfred Ford in West Virginia. They didn't have some George Harrison. They were in a farm area, and airports or whatever, that somehow the mission, like a means to the end of in Bhaktipada's mind, where at some point, whether the psychoanalysis that the mission jeopardizes the rules, and to a certain extent, like, yes, they're building the temple and they're completing this important task of his vision of creating a dharmic society in the West, but they have to resort to some pretty crazy means. And say maybe people just didn't know about it, that they're being funded from outside sources, and it's like someone made a donation, and like a don't ask, don't tell policy of where's the money coming from. But it's interesting, and also the times. Like I just finished on this course on the Beatles in the '60s. That people have to remember that we talked about in the first video, the times and the type era where New Vrindavan started in the late '60s, and the type people that were probably largely hippies, and drug use was very common, and the type people who were interested in chanting may have also been interested in buying a little bit of drugs, and type culture where it's not like these guys were criminal mafia racketeers, but I mean, you do cover this in your book. I mean, it was extremely interesting. You're saying, and it's maybe earth shattering. It's maybe disappointing, or maybe it makes sense. Like karmatically, this is larger karma. It's not surprising, even from a certain perspective. Like like no one was going to write a check for these guys to try to build some crazy temple in some farm area in West Virginia, and that they had to resort to like means of like drug dealing to fund it. I mean, God forbid. I mean, how do you put that together? You just say you didn't know about it till your part in it was over. You would have not even thought that was possible, or even when you were younger, like you knew the Beatles and you knew these people, Ginsberg, and obviously that would you have been that surprised if you had known at the time?
all right. First of all, yes, yeah, a lot of the money, at least $500,000 to build Prabhupada's palace came from a New Vrindavan scheme to purchase large quantities of hash oil in Afghanistan, smuggle it into India, and then smuggle it to the United States, where it was sold through contacts, all right, by devotees who had previously been in that business, all right. So, but yeah, and I'm not disagreeing with anything you said. However, the New Vrindavan devotees were not forced to deal drugs in order to build the palace or to develop their community. It's something that they saw as an opportunity to do this, but they weren't forced to that. Let's look at the Moonies, for instance. All right, we would meet them in the parking lots because we would do fundraising, picking in the parking lots also. I never heard that they were, dealing large quantities of drugs to build their mission. And then look at Paramahansa Yogananda Society, the Self-Realization Fellowship. They've got beautiful temples in California. I visited several of them, Encinitas, up and down the coast. And I have never heard anything that they did anything illegal to build these wonderful ashrams. And the people in Encinitas, they love them. There's health food stores called Swami's. In fact, the beach in Encinitas is called Swami's Beach. All right, and that's way different from the way ISKCON and New Vrindavan developed. The people hated ISKCON because we were known for cheating people in the airports and the parking lots and all this stuff. We weren't forced to do any of this, all right? But maybe it was the type of devotee that Prabhupada attracted, all right? That liked to do this, Maybe Paramahansa Yogananda attracted a person who was more sattvic, for instance.
Well,
right?
I mean, in defense of ISKCON, you're saying like, no, I mean, those people recruited wealthy, powerful people exclusively, and saying like, yeah, I mean, you have Vivekananda, you have a lot of movements, and I know from Jewish movements or any cultic movement or even regular society, usually they exclusively recruit people that are going to be able to benefit it. There's some that take everybody, and the ones that take everybody are generally, so to say, bottom feeding. If it's someone who's coming and I only want, millionaires and PhDs, and if you don't have those, you're not welcome. There's not going to be that much. I mean, Prabhupada definitely, if anyone familiar with ISKCON, wanted intellectuals. He wanted elites, but he said it was for everybody, and he was willing to take anybody, even, God forbid, if they were former criminals, like despicable people, and that's largely how Prabhupada demonstrated and proved the teachings. And he was saying the difference between those centers largely is they were paid for. I mean, some of the original ones like Paramahamsa Yogananda, I mean, some of those may have actually been hand-built by devotees, but I don't think you have another phenomenon where you had these people that were turned into laborers. And even just think about that Tirtha was just an American walking the streets that was a dangerous person before he even heard of Hare Krishna. And generally, even reading through it, like, it made him a better person. It did not stop him, God forbid, from being a murderer. He went on to kill more people. But if you look at it, he was turned into a laborer for the temple. He found this greater good and purpose he dedicated thousands of hours with no pay to this greater project. And so it's interesting, and maybe from a psychoanalysis level or greater sociological level, it had to be that way. And even from India, that became a pilgrimage site that, God forbid, in a certain level of Indian gurus, things like rape, murder, drug dealing, stealing are not unheard of. And God forbid, even rabbis, priests, business people, like, those are not unheard of. Like, I'm here in Metro Detroit, and there's a lot of, God forbid, murder capital of the year of the world. Sometimes, like, it's not. And so when you're taking just anybody, it attracted, but at the same time, getting them to recognize that there's possibly some better way of life out there and change their lifestyle to that way and dedicate hours into a mission. And then it was, okay, these people knew they had to raise money and ended up resorting to, these methods, God forbid. I mean, that's why I like your literature, your book, because, it's like a psychoanalysis of hundreds of people at the same time who accomplished great things and it did deep flaws. And it's also a religious journey experience of many people who changed their lifestyle, who had one way of lifestyle, and then even missionized. So you have ISKCON missionizers who are out there like fighting Maya in theory, saying we're going to change the lifestyle of the West into this way, versus maybe New Vrindavan's like a retreatist, like, we failed in the battle to convert the West, so we at least have to preserve this little center as a place for Dharma. And that mentality, if you want to say cultish type thing, makes sense for us against the world. And once you have that us against the world mentality, people might not be as scared about breaking the law or justifying the ends, justifying the means. And it's very interesting literature to me from that perspective. I don't know if you obviously didn't write it for me. You wrote it for a whole variety of purposes, but it's just a monumental task to understand who are these hundreds of characters that converted to this movement and then worked and ran something, and that it was done by laborers. It was done by these people. It's probably part of why it turned into a legitimate pilgrimage site. And this book here, Shali Kumar, the head of the Republican Hindu Foundation, he wasn't that part of elections that much, billionaire, and he talks about how he went to New Vrindavan. He was an Indian in America, and he heard about New Vrindavan, and he went there. And from a Westerner, you might not do that, but if you're a devotee of Krishna, or even interested in Hinduism from the perspective, you have to wonder, how is it that these flawed people accomplished what none of these other places did? And you were saying maybe they did, but I don't think it's the same. I'm not an expert in that either, I guess.
Well, you're certainly correct when you talk about flawed people, because Kirtanandana Swami, he said years ago that the devil and the devotee live in the same body. And even 5,000 some years ago, Lord Krishna said something very similar on the battlefield of Kurukshetra after the death of Duryodhana. Krishna says to the Pandava brothers, he says, no good man is entirely good, and no bad man is entirely bad. So, in other words, Duryodhana was considered a demon by the Pandavas. I mean, he had abused them so much for years and years, and finally he's dead. And Krishna is trying to temper that a little bit by pointing out that he had good qualities in himself as well. And so, in Gold, Guns, and God, this Swami Bhaktipada biography, I am, taking pains to reveal the positive and the negative sides of, and even ISKCON itself has positive and negative sides. The New Vrindavan community, it's like life. I mean, as Homo sapiens, all right, we're very.
Well, I mean, the greater perspective. You're not telling a story of murder and drug dealing. You're telling a story of the turning of a few acres of farmland into one of the greatest pilgrimage sites in North America, and but it includes all of these things because and it's almost a teaching to the theology, even if you're no longer a direct part of the movement, but the understanding of the world and how forces work. Things like taking high birth and low birth, or even reincarnation, how those factors factor into larger societal implications, cow killing, vegetarianism, like a cultural war, that there was an agreement among, even if you were under a flawed person and you recognized that Bhaktipada wasn't the saint that you thought he was, you were largely in agreement with the cultural war that he was waging, that it was worth your while to build this temple to Krishna, or to create this area where this Vedic lifestyle would take place. And I mean, are you still hold that this what you did to help create New Vrindavan was worthwhile, even if Kirtananda or you yourself didn't continue in that path?
All right, so yeah, my time at New Vrindavan, 15 years, most of it, I really had a great time. I mean, I chanted Hare Krishna, I attended the temple services, I ate Krishna Prasadam, I worked all day for my spiritual master, and then every month, if I was out on the road, we'd come back for 3 days for these wonderful festivals. We'd see the dance for the deities in the temple, we'd chant these enormous kirtans, and I felt a very intimate relationship with my spiritual master. He was like always kind to me. I never felt any abuse. Maybe that was because I was a surrendered soul, all right, and there was no need for him to really chastise me. Although maybe once or twice he did hit me once with his cane. One time, I think it was.
Well, I mean, you're saying you had direct dealings with a psychopathic murderer who, at the time you were dealing with him, had already killed multiple people, and you say that was completely unbeknownst to you, and maybe you didn't know him that well, but these people were amongst you, and you knew that they were your guru's guys, and you respected that. Maybe did it make sense to you? And even you write in the book like, I mean, it's interesting because my perspective. It's even related to Prabhupada, because Prabhupada was in Monroe, New York, where you have Hasidic settlements, but there's like a war between the locals who don't want these hippies and converts to Hinduism moving into their farmland, and there's people being ran off the road and beaten up, and houses being burnt down, and Kirtananda Swami enlists the help of a psychopathic murderer to protect the devotees. And God forbid, you as a person who maybe, I don't know if you're naive or knew about it, or it's just the karma of the world. It's the world we live in. And like, okay, we're in Metro Detroit. There's 400 murders committed every year, and the police solve only like 30% of those. So, God forbid, the majority of murders in America, anyone who knows crime statistics knows they go unsolved. And I'm not saying everybody, there's psychopathic killers all over the place, but they are, especially in big cities that, saying there's a lot of psychopathic killers in Metro Detroit that have got away with it and are on the loose. But the Kirtananda enlists this guy to fight his battles for him, and is somewhat successful at it, that he's able to, enlist. I mean, this man's a former U.S. Marine. And I don't think he was the only former U.S. military person that did for Kirtananda. And maybe I ask you about the general kind of like multiculturalism too. If you look at ISKCON as a form of integration, that in the larger battle, you're saying Kirtananda enlists Tirtha as a warrior, possibly illegal, to defend what he considered worthwhile. But if you looked at that also as the greater battle of integration versus segregation, that's an underlying tone of these battles.
Well, I don't. When you talk about Thomas Drescher, Tirtha Das, who had murdered at least 2 people who lived at Vrindaban, and as you mentioned in his book, 100 Monkeys, he mentions that prior to coming there, he had killed a number of people also. Not to mention his time in Vietnam as a soldier there. All right. So, it's okay. He was the community's chief enforcer. He was like the constable or the police chief, and that's fine.
Like Trump, he won for you guys. You're saying like he was your Trump. He was your guy, even though he wasn't friendly, and he was you knew what. I mean, God forbid you didn't know the extent, but you kind of knew what he did. However, he won for you guys. Like those, however, God forbid, hillbillies or just segregationists, they didn't want you there. And if you hadn't enlisted his help, they might have successfully kicked you out of town.
Yeah, that's fine. The point I was arriving at is that this is all well and good. I mean, any community needs some sort of police chief, but it went astray when Bhaktipada called him to begin murdering dissident devotees. All right, like Charles St. Denis or Stephen Bryant for that matter. See, that's when the abuse of power and Thomas Drescher. I mean, he really depended on his spiritual master, on Bhaktipada, for his life's mission. He was an insecure person at heart, and he needed that encouragement from his spiritual master in order to give him some self-worth. Okay, and then when Bhaktipada pretty much directs him to murder these 2 New Vrindavan residents, that's when it got really bad. It's one thing about outsiders. Redneck hillbillies might drive their pickup trucks and try to knock devotees off the road or shoot into their houses or something with a rifle. But when you hurt your own people, that's and that's why the whole thing fell apart. All the lawsuits and stuff because of these abuses of power. Does
I'm
that make
waiting
sense?
for you to talk for the stuff about Alan Dershowitz and like, I'll have to wait till you come out with that volume. And I brought on, I have a streaming partner. We do a Sunday show, Jennifer Scharf. She calls herself Church of Entropy. And we've, incorporated, called Hinduism. We talk about reincarnation, and we both follow Krishna and the Vedas in various forms. And, also kind of why I wanted to talk to you, is largely, it's difficult to be part of the Hare Krishna movement, to join ISKCON. One, there's a lot of rules, and be part of this international society, to just incorporating some of these teachings. So we talk about these things pretty regularly. Henry is not a streamer. I think the last time he streamed was the last time he talked to me. I've been trying to convince him to open up a YouTube channel and become a regular streamer. I'm happy to walk him through it. Jennifer is also a computer person. If you chose to, she would probably be more help to me, but I brought her on, and hopefully she could ask you some questions. And she's a critic of ISKCON in general, but she's a big fan of the Vedas and reincarnation, and probably also impressed at the accomplishment of New Vrindavan, despite the faulty people that accomplished it.
Sure.
Hi,
Jennifer?
nice to meet you.
Hi. Is that, I'm looking at your picture. It looks like a plastic plate with pizza. Oh, there you are. Hello.
I just don't usually go on camera because I'm a bit of an introvert, but yeah, this is me.
Oh, fantastic.
Your sound is a little bit low. I mean, streaming could be dangerous too, like especially for a woman. If you do become a streamer and you have women that are willing to talk to you, it could even be recommended that they, like there is danger in streaming. Obviously, there's danger in what you're doing, just writing books. But Jennifer has a lot of knowledge on the cultural or Vedic implications. And did you want to ask a question?
I was curious, first of all, if you knew which stanza it was that you were referring to when Krishna said there was good and bad men and bad and good men.
I can look it up. It's in fact, it's in the Mahabharata.
Yeah, I'd be interested just so I could reference it. I always like to have these, like, sort of collect these little sayings. And the other question I had was like, what happened here seems to not be an isolated incident. Like, I sort of think back to, I think his name was Osho, the guy with all the
Rajneesh.
Yeah, the one with all the cars, right?
Yeah.
So it just seems like these things always happen. Like and it was the same thing with Yogi Bhajan. I don't know if you're familiar with him, the guy who started Kundalini Yoga. You've heard of him? So he was also sort of tarred by the brush of like scandal, and it just seems to always go that way with these organizations. It starts out really good, and then there's something that happens that just that's all anybody remembers it by. So I guess I was wondering if you thought there was, like, looking back, would there be maybe some way to have caught it sooner, or do you think that it's just sort of inevitable when you're living in these types of communal situations that these debacles happen?
Yeah, debacles are inevitable, I think. Now, a lot can be said about the intentions of the guy in charge, or today perhaps the lady in charge. All right, but the problems at New Vrindavan really came because Kirtanandana Swami was not. He was just pretending to be a self-realized soul. All right, and he had so many gullible followers, myself included, who just like bought into that hook, line, and sinker. And now Swami Prabhupada, for instance, who started the Hare Krishna movement itself back in New York in '65, he was a much more honest and self-realized person. He didn't engage in like sexual activities with children like Kirtanandana did. So if I talk a lot about deranged devotion, especially in my first book, Killing for Krishna. And devotion's a great thing, all right? But if you're devoted to a guy who's, molesting boys and ordering assassinations in secret, all right? We weren't aware of this. Most of the Krishna devotees, I think they're sincere people. If they found out that a leader was doing this stuff, they would kick him out, which is what happened at New Vrindaban.
I'm going to disagree. That's one of the main reasons I brought you on. Two perspectives. One also is from a person who's a Hasidic Jew and was in New York, and I was involved in Hasidic areas that had special government permission. And if anyone follows the news, it's constant lawsuits all over New York and bad blood between these Hasidic groups that are expanding and taking over more territory, and the local people that don't like them moving in, or the different way of life in the culture wars, and in some part to be part of a hated group that maybe you lose the social battle and all of your leaders are disgraced, but we continue on. We still have our little areas and our synagogues. They didn't close down, even though every single newspaper article for like decades is always bad. And so from the cultic movement perspective, if you're creating a different lifestyle, even though the leaders went down and maybe it was disgraced, but the project succeeded in the extent that it's still there and the lifestyle was protected. And then the greater sociological, of course the guru has to deal with these people, and you lay it out in your book. Maybe when you were there you didn't understand it in that way, but the larger New Vrindavan, you have the Fringies, you have the semi-devotees, and who do various things, from donate money and help out with the things that devotees can't do, like construction and legal or various things, or people friendly to the movement who don't keep the rules, that God forbid do things that are completely against the rules, like having affairs on their wife and various things, but they don't get ostracized completely. There's layers of the community where there's a central area where it's like, no, you can't be a member of the community once you've done those things. However, there's an outer community of the people that have broken the rules but are still part of this outer layer. And Kirtananda is running both layers at the same time, and that the people on the inside layer would expect that Kirtananda would keep the rules, or any guru or any situation, like a rabbi or something. Like it could just be your local rabbi, and it's like, is your local rabbi smoking weed with the bad boys, or your priest? And so I think as a Protestant evangelical, Kirtananda basically resorted, this is my psychoanalysis, that Protestant evangelicals, maybe even some other forms, it's like, yeah, like that's what we do. Like I stand in front of the congregation, I protect the women and children and the stuff that they know nothing about, they're better off knowing nothing about. And that's why you like Kirtananda's monk. He protected you from that. But at the same time, you need someone strong who could deal with the troubles out there in the world. And that there's these characters that you wouldn't want to be in close corridors with, but they're on the right side. Like I say, a lot of maybe Orthodox Jews look at Trump like that. Like he's not. We wouldn't want our kids acting like that, but at least he's winning our battles. So from the guru perspective, I think from a certainly a academic point of view, like of course all gurus are like that, but even from a spiritual point of view, the theology of being a perfect person contradicts with it. But you have the greater level is can you still remember Kirtananda? And you can't remember him as a saint, but how do you disqualify his accomplishment? And was he a victim of karma? Like so to say, like a failed Messiah, as a follower, like a Judeo concept, like saying my rabbi should have been Messiah, and he only failed because his followers didn't live up to it. And so as a follower, like Kirtananda, like it was our fault that he didn't live up to what we wanted him to, or some sort of perspective that I don't know if, Jennifer knows more about the general cult craft and Vedic implications. I don't know if you've moved in, Henry, like in your post New Vrindavan days to larger interfaith or research into similar type things or sociology of societies?
Well, right now I am basically focusing on this history, and I've got 8 more volumes. But after I'm done with that, I will have a lot more free time to explore all these fascinating, cross-cultural, cross-religious hints that you're giving me.
Do you think you might be interested in streaming with us at some stage when you have more time? Because we really enjoy the interface. And sorry to say this, but I think there's some sort of interference on the microphone. Is that on my end?
No, it's Henry's, and I'm trying to talk to him. He probably has to buy a microphone. We're out there to help you become a streamer. You'd have to think about it. Obviously, to just be an author that only gets interviewed about your book. I mean, that's also, we're happy just to interview about your book, and I'm looking forward to the rest of it, especially the Alan Dershowitz stuff. But yeah, if you wanted to just join a community, and I was saying, you create your own channel, and you got to create your own community that's interested in talking about what you talk about. But if you just wanted to come, we have a weekly Sunday show and talk about greater karma. And we're familiar with ISKCON, not from New Vrindavan. I know Mother Malati, here in Detroit. I know people, almost everyone that's serious about ISKCON in Detroit has been to New Vrindavan. And Jennifer's in she was in Ottawa, saying she knows ISKCON, she knows Hare Krishnas, they're everywhere. And to look at this to people who never been to New Vrindavan and might be shocked by what you're telling us.
Well, I'm sorry if the sound is not good. This is only the second time I've ever been streaming, but I am interested into looking into that in the future.
Where's your book holding right now? Are you saying you've basically completed all 10 volumes, but you have the editing process, and you didn't? Maybe you explain why you chose to start with volume 3 and 5. But what could we expect? When are we gonna get the full set? And is there still information you're digging up? Is there still stuff that you have to do more research to finish?
Yes, but most of the work was finished 5 years ago, and then I got distracted because of discovering these classified documents about the Stephen Bryant murder. So then that book, Killing for Krishna, came out first, and then the second book, Naked Emperor. So now I'm finally back to Gold, Guns, and God, the Swami Bhaktipada biography and history of New Vrindavan. And as far as the timeline goes, volume 1 is almost finished. I think it's especially fascinating because I've already
bought it. I paid in advance for volume 1.
Yes, you did. Yes, and I owe you a copy. But I acquired an unpublished manuscript by Howard Wheeler, who was Keith Ham's lover, Kirtanandana Swami, back in the early 1960s. And it's an autobiography he wrote in 1966 before he met the Swami. And I think it's just so fascinating. So anyway, that's coming out next, hopefully in December, which is around the corner. And then I don't have any plans. I may take a break for a month or something, because I got three volumes just came out, October, November, December, 3 volumes. So I'll probably take a break, and within a couple of years, all the remaining 7 volumes should be ready.
Yeah, you definitely earned a break. I actually had a question about the writing process, because I don't know if you know this, but both Doooovid and I are trying to psych ourselves up to actually write a book, and neither of us has done anything like that before. So I was wondering if you could tell us how you get into the mind, what's your ritual surrounding writing from someone who's actually finished the process multiple times.
Well, before you answer, that's part of what keeps me chanting Hare Krishna. Sri Nandana, I got 30 of his books, and Henry here. And I'm saying, chanting Hare Krishna, it takes a lot of time. I chant Hebrew and do other things. But I see people like Henry, Sri Nandana, wrote tens and tens of books. and it keeps me chanting. I don't know if that's the only answer you're going to give.
Well, there's certainly no harm in chanting, whether it be Sanskrit or Hebrew mantras like that. But boy, Jennifer, I mean, yeah, I mean, I've been writing since I was a kid, I suppose. After I left New Vrindaban, that was in '93. I moved to Pittsburgh and I worked as a musician and explored a career as a classical accordionist. And I played with a number of orchestras and recitals, but it really wasn't the money wasn't worth the effort, so I gave that up. But during that time, I became interested in the history of the accordion, written a few books about the accordion. And so basically you have to, and I got invited to write an article for this online music website, New Music Box it's called. They wanted an article about the accordion and the registration, in other words, the reeds, how you get the different sounds, like a pipe organ has a different kind of pipes. Accordion also has different kind of reeds inside. And then they offered me, they paid me $500 for that back in '97 or something. And then after that article, they liked my work, so they invited me to write an article about klezmer music and the accordion in klezmer music. And they offered another $500. But I don't really know that much about klezmer music. See, so for me, it would be like starting from scratch, learning this. Although I have played with a klezmer band when I lived in Pittsburgh. But I declined it because I didn't feel that determination, that motivation to want to do this, But as
you
far
weren't willing to play bar mitzvahs in order to raise money to build the Golden Temple. You could have used your accordion skill to make large sums of money playing Hava Nagila at bar mitzvahs and turned it down.
I have a student,
He already knew how to play the accordion. He's saying he would have had to learn a whole new discipline, and he just didn't have it in him to do it. But he already knows how to play the accordion, right? So going to bar mitzvah is easy.
And I have a student right now who lives in upstate New York who's learning Hava Nagila right now. So, but no. And see, the thing about this 10-volume Gold Guns and God is because it's just something that is like bursting out of me. It's like this has to. I feel that it has to be done. It's like important.
We feel like it was what you were created to do.
Seem to describe how they feel about writing.
Right, and if you don't have that drive, that motivation, that bursting out of you, that this has to be revealed to the world. I mean, you may not be able to write really great stuff,
Well, I do. It's just a physics theory. So my problem is, I know I have to write a story that's compelling in a book form, and that it has to have a unified theme. It's just that I've been a teacher for most of my life, and so I'm used to go in, figure out what the problem is, solve the problem, end it. And a book doesn't take that form at all. So I guess I'm looking for inspiration for like, how do I get into, because I do have a message that I'm bursting out with, but it's like an algebraic equation, right? And that's not very exciting to many people.
Well, then I would only suggest that you just start. And maybe every day, if you work for 30 minutes or something, and every day you throw it away, that's okay, And then maybe after a few weeks, you know what I'm saying? The ideas may coalesce in your head a little better, and you'll have a little experience and may be able to do that. But if you want to do something, you have to just start and do it, right? A journey of 1,000 miles begins with one step. You've been thinking about a lot, and that's great. All right.
I've written about 125 articles, varying in length from 1,000 to 3,000 words on my blog. The difficulty for me is going to the next level, which is a book, which I'm told is like a minimum of maybe, I don't know, you'd know better than me, like 80,000 words.
I don't know, but at least 150 pages. I don't know how many words go on a page, but yeah. So this is exciting, Jennifer. I look Well, organization helps too. I mean, if you have an idea what, I mean, I'm sure you know what you want to talk about. Maybe decide some chapters, perhaps.
That's the problem. I literally don't, because what I'm used to doing is somebody will come to me and they'll say, "Hey, Jen, I have all these questions," and then I'll figure out how they learn, and then I'll give them the answer to the question in their own language. That's what I'm used to doing. But a book is like a more generalized version of that. So I'm in this state where I can't really like figure out what's the philosophy of writing a book as it differs from the philosophy of writing an article, which is a lot more like get in, identify the problem, and solve it, and then get out.
Well, I would still just suggest to start it, just to try it.
And related to ISKCON, when it's the history of publishing company. New Vrindaban, relatively, I think it's small in publishing, but relative to ISKCON history, they're constantly opening up their own printing presses and publishing books on their own, and creating authors that like ISKCON turned hundreds of just relatively average people into prolific authors. It's almost amazing. Someone could probably even write a study on it. And I had two more questions related to your work that you don't cover, but it might be a general interest to me, maybe from your viewers, a greater sociological perspective. One is on integration and multiculturalism, like demographics. Was New Vrindavan like an experiment to some extent in multiculturalism besides, or was it predominantly, so to say, white? And I mentioned, I'll put the two together because I read in your book that you had initiation on the same day that Bhakti Tirtha Swami took his second initiation, and he's very popular here in Detroit. I know a lot of Bhakti Tirtha followers. Probably Detroit's one of the strongholds, and that's fascinating. If you want to talk about your relation with Bhakti Tirtha, or if that was just random that the initiation was on the same day, and kind of the level of New Vrindavan is in integration you don't really cover in the book, because over a 40-year period there's a lot of integration that happened. And so was New Vrindavan like a rapid experiment in integration? Did you think about it from that perspective?
Well, I really never thought about it from that perspective, but I could say a couple of things. One is, I think it was a coincidence that Bhakti Tirtha Swami got his sannyas initiation the same day that the same fire sacrifice that I became known as Rishikesh Das of New Vrindavan. And, even when I came to New Vrindavan in 1978, there might have been 150 maybe devotees living there, but there was a number of Black people, not a lot, maybe 6, but one of the temples in Bhaktipada zone was Cleveland, and that temple was at least 50%, if not more, 75% Black. Of course, the neighborhood was a Black neighborhood, of course, so maybe they attracted a lot of converts. And as far as multiculturalism goes, there's always been Black people, and especially in the last 30 years, Hindus, Indian people, and that's certainly just as multicultural, I think, as Black people or Indian people or Native Americans or Muslims. I don't think that answers your question, but that's just an observation.
Well, it's an interesting sociological perspective, probably more to my viewers to think about, and what I'm thinking about reading your book on top of your goal in reading the book. That's also interesting to me, but for a wider audience. And you probably have to just complete and put out your book, your whole series, to think about. You'll discover the implications of because ISKCON, obviously ISKCON's well known all over the world. Most scholars, university, Hare Krishna is even taught in university history of religion courses. It's reached the Supreme Court, and you've accomplished something that doesn't exist. Comprehensive history of New Vrindavan. So I definitely appreciate you coming on in your time. If you have time to take a few more questions from Jennifer, and you're happy that you get back to your busy days.
Yeah, if Jennifer has any questions, I'll do my best to answer them.
And you're saying we're hoping that this would kind of be like streaming, like you come on any Sunday night, and then eventually that you would have your own Sunday night show or your own show where you would put together like your new chapter, what you're doing in your book, and at the same time just have conversation or tips of the trade, best tips for there's some devotees trying to do it, and then like a general purpose. So you'll be more than welcome anytime in your regular Sunday week in review.
I'm going to go back to Jennifer, a question that you talked about, writing a book as opposed to writing articles. Okay, and I see that a comparison. Let's say there's a songwriter or a composer, and he's such as myself, who have written many short works. All right, but to write a symphony, all right, that is a very complex and large scale structure. Kind of like comparing an article to a book. I can write a tune or a short piece, but then the symphony, that is a big endeavor, and it's a lot more complex as far as making a storyline. I mean, the music, it doesn't have a literal storyline, but there is a beginning, a journey, all right? And the journey may have several episodes also before the conclusion like that. So then all you got to do is just start, all right? And you'll have pieces and pieces, and then later you may discover, oh, these pieces fit together nicely like this, so I can, the first movement might have a different structure like that. So just start and just make piles of paper or files on your computer, and eventually I think it'll start to come together in your mind how it's going to fit together. That's what I would say.
Well, thank you so much for that wonderful metaphor. And perhaps I will listen to some classical symphonies later on in order to inspire myself. So it's been really great talking to you. I guess I'll just leave you with one last question. And now that you've accomplished this wonderful putting out of 3 books in such a short time span, what are you going to do to celebrate in particular?
I haven't thought about it. I have, you know what I might.
I didn't think you had, because you just seem like
you didn't read his book. If you had read his book,
so
you would know the answer. It's more work.
The thing is, I mean, doing this research and writing is like a huge pleasure for me. I mean, it's work, but it's joy too. It's like I love to do it. It's so much fun. It's like I really enjoy this, especially discovering some new information. It's like, oh my God, look, that's how these 2 pieces fit together. It's like like an enlightenment of kind of like thing. But if I put this Gold Guns of God aside for a month, I'm gonna go hiking in the mountains. All right, I love forests and mountains.
Thank you so much for sharing. We'll talk to you again soon.
Okay, thanks for coming on, Jennifer. Anything else, Doooovid? Are we good?
Yeah, I appreciate you coming on and saying in likelihood, if it works out well, like you'll probably come out with multiple editions, and like I'm recommending kind of pushing you to become a streamer, is there'll probably be a lot more information that comes forward, and it might make sense for people to come to you, and and that there would be multiple editions coming out with this, and you'd have to see the interest level. Like, I mean, you got to meet your expenses. You'd be author, and you get people to buy books, and the difficulty of authorship in general, versus people like me that are, I guess, friends of New Vrindaban and Hare Krishna movement in general, and think there's what to learn about it, despite the bad things that are revealed in it. And I think you'll find enlightenment because there'll be people that know things that you don't, that are interested in the work that you did. I mean, I think even I was able to possibly tell you a few pieces of information that you didn't know, let alone probably the thousands, maybe tens of thousands of people out there that know things about New Vrindavan that no one else knows.
Agreed. And yes, I'm definitely going to look into seriously about streaming, and I thank you for having me on your show, and I look forward to seeing you again.
Yeah, you come out with another few volumes, like definitely the Alan Dershowitz stuff. I don't know how many months, like when you do that, like hopefully he'll come back. That might be more interesting to my some of my audience.
He mentions Swami Bhaktipada in his autobiography.
He says it's the strangest thing. He says that was the strangest case in his whole life. That so of all the things, he even defended Trump in that eventually, but that Bhaktipada, that was the strangest case he ever did.
Yeah, but he won the appeal, and it cost hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars, if not more. But Bhaktipada had the money, and he got off.
And Greta Van Susteren, I don't know if you cover Greta Van Susteren. The ends up is a character in this that ends up becoming a big name.
Right. She defended Terry Sheldon, Tapapunch Swami. Right, and she was later like the 16th. Forbes magazine said she was the 16th most powerful woman in the world, or something like a few decades later. All right,
definitely looking to the rest.
I got to move on.
Okay, thanks for coming by. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Hare Krishna, Doooovid. Take care.